We are, of course, in conversation with Professor Joleen Steyn Kotze, as well as my colleague, SABC News Research Specialist Maswele Ralebona. We're talking about the survey, of course, that will be done by the Human Sciences Research Council tomorrow around election satisfaction survey, Prof. Just listening to that conversation and having listened to previous conversations around, the country, particularly in the run-up to this election, the problems are the same in as far as what people are facing from a municipality perspective. Just what of the, the things that have keep coming up recurrently, from the survey, and how do they help the IEC, for instance, and political parties, if at all?
I'm going to answer my question, or answer your question in two ways. So I'm going to switch back to our South African Social Attitude Survey, where we do run quite a lot of questions around public trust in institutions, of which, of course, the IEC is one of those institutions. And the one thing I can say is that throughout our democratic history, public trust in the IEC has remained stable. So it is one of those institutions that in the public mind works, delivers on the mandate of free and fair elections. When you then take it a little bit further and you start asking around public trust of, do I trust my councillor? Do I trust my political party? Do I trust my politician? There a slightly different picture emerges, and we do see declining levels of trust. And again, because a sense within the public mind, there is this view that, well, I'm still struggling to access water, or I'm still struggling to access a job, or some form of financial security for my future.
Maswele, you spoke a little bit about the article that you wrote not too long ago. I mean, the title, a rural curse of democracy is so striking, and yet I think it probably speaks to a lot of people. Not too long ago, we saw that the Public Service Commission, led by Professor Somadoda Fikeni, was established. I mean, some of the things that you've just highlighted now, what is this, commission, planning to do in as far as some of the concerns that you've raised, are, and is it little too late for that, or we still have, some time to salvage some of the mess?
I believe there's still time to correct the wrongs. In terms of the article that I wrote, my experience is that rural areas, despite the fact that we have a department that is focused on rural development, they seem to have been forgotten. Nobody channels enough resources to the rural areas, as if there are no taxpayers in those areas. And with PSC, Public Service Commission, I have seen their work, I've seen their reports, and in most cases they are positive, because they they are the regulator or the watchdog of government's work. I believe that there's still window for improvement in South Africa. Generally, we are like I've watched so many speeches, especially from government officials, when they say we are a resilient society, we are a resilient nation.
Until a point.
And I think they are right, because look at us now. Instead of throwing our toys around and say, we are not doing this, we are not registering to vote, we are not entertaining these democratic processes, it's been 30 years, we don't have this, we don't have that. We still have some positives to take home. And we, instead of saying we don't want to do this now, we are saying we want to do it. If it means change, let's do it. If it means we continue with the hope of improving in future, we are willing to do that.
And Prof, just on those words, that Maswele touched on in terms of the improvements, I want to switch this conversation up a bit and talk about what has gone right in this country. It is 30 years of democracy. We know that there are many wrongs. But what are some of the, the positives, particularly from the surveys that you've been, conducting, and just from your own work and research?
Well, so I think for me, we of course asked the question, given that it is democracy at 30, we wanted to know what was done right over the last 30 years. So what is the feedback that one is going to get from the public when you kind of ask, okay, we know what's wrong, but now what has gone right? And it was an overwhelming response around education and broadening access to education. We got answers around freedom of movement, on having social welfare grants, a social security network, which, yes, some of our research points to that it might be inadequate in some cases, but in other cases it really provides a valuable safety net, social safety net for people. And I also looked at, and I was particularly curious because we are at the Rock, right? So I was particularly curious around questions of a fair election, and it was quite interesting to see that in terms of one of the things that was done right over the last 30 years was a sense that people expressed that we have free elections. I have freedom of speech, I have freedom of assembly.
And that's an important point, because I think, just ahead of this election, that's one of the things that the IEC has been talking about, and just honing in terms of protecting the integrity and the independence, of the IEC. But Maswele, just in terms of what the professor has said, and I want you to continue, Prof, a little bit later on, but we were talking now about just that issue about mobility. I mean, we come up with the best ideas and the best pilot projects. You mentioned and touched on Gautrain, and how that was started and hasn't really gone, anywhere to the scale in which we were expecting it to go. But we do a lot of that, in this country. What does that do in terms of, progress and achieving what South Africa can actually achieve, because we have the potential?
You can see, like you put it, we have a potential. You can see we have a potential. When Gautrain was started, for example, with the aim of providing transport during the 2010 World Cup, it's been 15 years now since that project was started, and every now and then, almost every speech from the Gauteng, either from the city of Joburg or the Gauteng government, they talk about taking it to Soweto, taking it to Mamelodi, taking it, and not long ago I remember there was a meeting between the Gauteng Premier and the Limpopo Premier. They were talking about the high-speed train between Gauteng and Polokwane, So there's that. We've heard about we are expanding this, but it never goes anywhere. But when you look at the data from Stats, for example, I'll go back to them because they are one of the credible sources of information that we have in terms of data. You have like 59% out of 62 million people in South Africa. 59% of those have piped water. But I still have questions there in terms of that statistic to say have piped water, because in most cases, especially in the rural, go back to the rural areas.
You have the infrastructure.
You have the infrastructure underground that's supposed to deliver water to these communities. But Unati, you find that people have not seen water, a drop of water from those taps outside or inside their homes for more than a month, or for ever since the infrastructure was installed. And they now buying 25 liters of water, 5 rand or even more from their neighbors who managed to get something and dug boreholes for themselves. Something that these rural municipalities, for example, the Wembe district municipalities, it's got a sole mandate, provide water to the local municipalities around it. But communities in the Wembe district, they do not have water.
Wow. And Prof, I mean, just from what Maswele is saying, that we want to celebrate, and we see the changes, but often they're not. You have these structures that are built with good intentions, but they sit there idle. I mean, we've had so many reports of stadia that has been built, for instance, for recreational purposes in that particular community, but it services nothing. So it is a strain to find the good news stories, but they are there.
No, I would say they definitely are there. And I think, as we reflect on democracy at 30, and you're raising the questions around 3 decades of democracy, I think most South Africans, especially as it emerges from our various surveys as well, are acutely aware of their challenges. They are acutely aware of what the governance challenges are, what the service delivery challenges are. And I think very often we do not necessarily ask ordinary South Africans, but what do you think is working for you? And that was part of the rationale around this particular question, was to say, you know what has worked for you? And as I've mentioned, the rollout of education, social welfare, free and fair elections with freedom of speech, freedom of association. And interestingly enough, because of course now I got curious, so I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. And I wanted to know that as South Africans are talking about what has gone right in this country, what are the concepts that are coming together within this analysis? So, you know, when South Africans spoke of, for example, discrimination and the fact that we do not have racial discrimination in terms of where you live, where you are allowed to be, you're allowed to walk. Questions of inequality started coming up. And South Africans saying, well, I now have freedom of choice. I can choose where I want to walk to. I have freedom of movement. I don't have to show a document to say where I am. And along coupled with that, that also linked to questions around socioeconomic status. So job opportunity, delivery, and all of those things. And there, the concept around education came through quite strongly, and that education is linked with equal opportunity. That said, I think there's a deep appreciation for the challenges around those questions, but there's also, I believe, a deep appreciation around knowing that if I want, as an ordinary South African, want to advance in my life, I need to get a good education in order to have that equal opportunity.
And just that question, of course, of drivers and enablers becomes, you know, to come into play. But thank you so much to both of you for, you know, indulging us this afternoon, and of course picking our brains a lot about some of the things that are coming out on the ground. But importantly, I think from this conversation is that tomorrow, you know, as a voter, when you are then, you know, approached by the Human Sciences Research Council members to participate in the election satisfaction survey, that you need to take part, because that is important. And they would, I would imagine, Prof, be, you know, identifiable, so that people can then, you know, speak to them and engage with them, because this information is very crucial.
So we will be asking approximately randomly 50 voters at the voting station that we are stationed at. You will see our field workers. They have beautiful blue bibs. Be kind to your field worker, and, you know, please complete our survey. It is important because it provides not just the IEC, but it actually provides the nation information on the quality of our election as well as the free and fairness of our election.
All right, let me thank you both for your time. Really do appreciate it. Of course, that was Professor Joleen Steyn Kotze in studio with me, as well as my colleague, SABC News specialist, the researcher Maswele Ralebona. Of course, we are talking about a number of issues as we lead up to those crucial elections tomorrow. It is now, Ralebona, apologies. It is now 3:30. That means 1.5 hours to go before the special votes do close, you know, today. So if you have registered to vote in the special vote, do make your way to those voting stations. Of course, that closes in an hour and a half's time. Of course, there will be a press briefing here at the IEC, and the IEC will be giving just a breakdown in terms of, you know, how many numbers they've facilitated during the 2-day special votes. 1.6 million people were earmarked to be voting during this period as we lead up to that crucial 29th May election tomorrow. From me right here at the IEC Rock, the hub of the IEC. We're going to take you back to the studio where we'll find Alicia, but of course we'll be back where there is a hive of activity already happening here.
All right, Unathi, since you are stationed at the Rock, a very quick one. We're all interested to know, is the IEC going to be giving us an update in terms of how voter turnout, as well as some of the challenges in terms of how they've addressed them today? What time is that likely to take place?
Alicia, the IEC has indicated that it will have that briefing at 6 p.m. tonight. And of course, that briefing will happen just right behind me where I'm currently located. There is a seating area that already is prepared. And of course, that's where the IEC leadership will be briefing media just in terms of how everything went. So you will recall, of course, yesterday on day one, there was a media briefing that was held around 4 o'clock. But because voting stations close at 5 p.m., I think it will allow them, to coordinate with the various provinces just in terms of, the turnout and then get us those numbers. We are expecting them, of course, to also touch on some of the voting stations that were closed yesterday, you will recall, because of those isolated violent incidents that happened, particularly in the Eastern Cape, in Mthatha specifically. We'll also, of course, get a breakdown in terms of, how the law enforcement authorities were able to then deal with some of those incidents. But that is all going to be happening at 6 p.m., an hour after those voting stations close.